What's the scariest story you heard a child tell about their imaginary friend? So my son had an imaginary friend named Bored. I can only ever imagine my son asking his name and the friend saying, "I'm bored." Anyway, he met him when we moved to an old house. The friend was unnerving at best, had mean cats, and lived in the wall. Sometimes he would like Bored. Other times he would tell us he was mad at Bored because he was being mean and not letting him sleep. Sometimes Bored would lock the door to his room and let no one in or out. It was freaky shit. But for the most part, he liked playing outside with him, except for when Bored would try to get him to play in the road. Fast forward sometime later, we were walking past the cemetery by our house, and he walks in there, points to a circle of trees, I'm talking 5 8-foot tall trees, and says, "That's where Bored is from." I look in between the trees, and lo and behold, a gravestone is inside, absolutely covered by these trees and vines, but still just barely visible. We moved soon thereafter. Bored did not follow. I don't know if this would be considered an imaginary friend, but this happened when I was around 4, 5, or 6. It was a couple months after my grandfather died from lung cancer. He was a big smoker, and we were living at my grandmother's house at the time. One day, I was on the couch, and my grandmother was talking about her wedding with my grandfather. I ended up saying, "I was at your wedding." And then they explained to me that no, I wasn't, and my grandmother asked me questions about it, and I answered every single one correct. I think this was a week before or after, but on that day, I was talking to myself, and I usually talk a lot to myself. My mom walked in and asked who I was talking to. My mother told me that I responded with, "I'm talking to Pap Pap." A couple months passed after these events, and they started re-asking me, and told me if I remember talking to my grandfather. I forgot everything. When I was 8, I remember getting ready for school, and my grandma was still alive. This is forever in my mind. I see a white figure, the same shape he is, and I saw him walk into the bathroom. That was the last time I saw or spoke to him. A mumsnetter had a 6 to 7-year-old lad, if I remember correctly, who had this imaginary friend who started out quite normal, but then began telling the boy he didn't like his mom and dad. The son freely told the mom this, and then was whispering ideas to him about hurting or upsetting his mom or the pets. The mumsnetter decided to not make a big deal out of it, but tried to discourage chat about the imaginary friend. She could always tell if her son thought the imaginary friend was there, as he had a certain uncomfortable look at times, meal times when they were all together, etc. Sometimes she would ask, and the son would say, "He's in the hall and won't come in 'cause you're here. He's told me to try and bite you." The OP would feel watched from the hall, feel an atmosphere, etc. Unbeknownst to her son, upon the advice of a friend, she tried sprinkling salt across doorways, herb cleansing, and saying prayers, and the whole atmosphere in the house lightened. A couple of days later, while her son was playing happily in the living room, she couldn't stand the suspense anymore, and asked, "Is your imaginary friend not here?" And son said, "No, and I'm a bit glad." OP, trying to keep it light, said, "Well, that's good then." Son said, and this is the bit that gave me the heebie-jeebies when I first read it, "But he's just out there," and points to the front of the house, "and he's watching us through the window." I was the child, and all of my imaginary friends were terrifying. Sometimes horror enthusiasts are born, not made. I was a morbid kid. I can't imagine how my mom felt hearing about this crew on the regular from her 6-year-old. Daphne was my twin sister who died at birth, but didn't really die. She crawled out of my mother's womb and down the street after our birth, where she lived in a hole under my bed. She wasn't human, so she wasn't allowed to live like a human. She was polite, but manipulative, and I warned people not to trust her. She could possess me, and we would trade bodies. My mom never actually lost a child, so this wasn't a weird way of working through grief or anything like that. Anna was the weird girl who lived in the mirror dimension, and wanted very badly to get out. Making eye contact with her, aka looking at my own reflection, when she was in the wrong mood, could allow her to steal my body and leave me trapped in the mirror dimension in her place. I also insisted there was a mummified child who was murdered and buried under the floorboards in my bedroom closet, and she was friends with the ghost of another murdered child who kept her company. This is the story of a family friend who is a single mother. Her and her young daughter, maybe 3 to 4 years old, fell on hard times and moved to a cheaper apartment downtown. Her daughter developed an imaginary friend who she claimed was a little girl who visited her through a door in the wall at night. Soon, behavioral problems ensued. Daughter was not sleeping, complained her friend was mean to her after she had said she didn't want to play anymore and wouldn't let her sleep. The daughter started acting out, and the mother became concerned once heads were ripped off of Barbie dolls and eyes and mouths were blacked out with Sharpie. The last straw, though, was when mother found burned pieces of doll clothing and hair in the daughter's bedroom. Daughter kept blaming the imaginary friend, who was now relaying disturbing tales of how the imaginary friend wanted to play with fire and burn clothes. Her daughter stated she was afraid of the friend, who wanted the daughter to be her forever friend. Mother is scared as hell and confides in a friend/neighbor. Comes to find out that the apartment they lived in was remodeled after a fire. In a tragic accident, a family perished, including a young girl, approximately the age of the daughter. They noped the fuck out of there, and the daughter resumed her usual happy-go-lucky self. She doesn't remember anything about this imaginary friend. When I was like 15 or 16, for months I would wake up and see what I can only describe as a black mist in the top right corner of my room by the door. It was always in the same spot. It was maybe 3 feet in diameter and mostly looked like smoke, but when I looked closer, it looked more like something was hiding inside of it. Something curled up, completely black, and with red eyes. I often saw it in SP, but sometimes completely awake. I never told my family about this, but it was terrifying. A few years later, I was with my mom talking about all sorts of random things. We got on the topic of psychics, and she mentioned that one time, when she was younger, she went to a party and was introduced to a woman who claimed to be a psychic. Her friend introduced them, and according to my mom, the psychic went wide-eyed when she shook my mom's hand, and absolutely freaked out. She looked at my mom's friend and told her she had to leave the party. She wouldn't stay in the house with this woman. She then looked at my mom and told her, "You have something following you. There's a black cloud above your head." And then she left the party. My mom never thought much of it, wrote it off as a rude woman at the party who was crazy or on drugs. Fast forward a few more years, I'm around 24. My mom still lives in the same house and has a new daughter as well. My little sister is about 3 years old. My little sister's bedroom is my old bedroom. I'm talking to my mom, and my mom casually says, "Hey, didn't you used to have lots of nightmares when you lived here?" "Yeah, to say the least." "Strange thing, I think your sister is having them now too." "What do you mean?" "Well, she keeps telling me about her imaginary friend that is the black rain cloud in her room that talks to her at night." I absolutely froze and felt a sheer panic. I never told my family the details of what I saw. I looked at my mom and hardly choked out the question. "Did she say where the cloud is?" "Yeah, actually. It's always in the top right corner of the room by the door." When I was about to lose my first tooth, my mom started telling me about the tooth fairy and how if I hid the tooth under my pillow, the fairy would give me some quarters for it. Apparently, I was adamant that I wouldn't be doing that, and the tooth fairy couldn't have it even if she gave me money. Eventually, my mom asked why I was so against it. I told her I'd already told Bane that he could have it. Bane was my imaginary friend, and he'd told me that either I gave him the tooth or he comes and tears one out of my gums while I'm sleeping. My mom was obviously like, "What the fuck?" and she kept asking questions. I said that Bane had no mouth and one big tooth coming out of his nose. He needed a second one for the other nostril. My mom asked where Bane was now, and I said he lived behind the trunk. My mom moved this trunk up to our crawl space, and I never mentioned Bane again. Now my son has always had a bit of an affinity for the creepy and weird. He loves ghosts and skeletons, Halloween, monsters, etc. So most of his imaginary friends so far have been that, friendly monsters and ghosts. He always specifies, "They're friendly, Daddy, not mean." So we recently moved into a new house, older house, full of weird creaks and bumps in the night. Even as the adult in this situation, I admit, they creep me out a bit. Like, completely sounds like someone is walking around, up and down stairs, down hallways, the occasional thump on the door, like someone pushed on it. Convincing enough that months later I still get up to check it out. It also came with a creepy basement. We decided from day one that we weren't going to let my 3-year-old down there, or even let him know that the basement exists, because of course he would want to go down. It's not hard to conceal. The door to the basement is in a little side hall, so we just keep it closed with a couple storage bins in front, just so he couldn't sneak down himself. Second day after we moved in, he said, "Daddy, I love my new house. We should go down to the basement." I didn't tell him about it. Neither did my partner. He wasn't there while we moved stuff in, so whatever, right? He's a toddler, not stupid. Our last place had a basement, so maybe he just expects this one to have one as well. So I tell him no, we can't play down there, stairs aren't safe, floors are all dirty. He's a little disappointed, but he moves on, as toddlers do. Next day, "Daddy, the man says we should play in the basement." "No, we can't play down there." "But the man says it's okay. Says he wants to be my friend and play with me." Weird, but again, he's always had ghost friends, so I brushed it off. Basically, it goes on like this for a couple days, with him getting really insistent, and then upset that I won't let him go downstairs to play with his new friend. Last time, he got really upset over it. He actually yelled, "He just wants to play with chalk. We draw, Daddy." So about a week later, I have to go looking for something downstairs. We do our new routine of my partner playing with the kid upstairs while I sneak down, just to try and avoid fighting over it. I move some boxes, and what do I see on the walls? Faded chalk drawings, and the nub of a piece of chalk on the ground. My child will never go down there, and now I make sure someone's at least in the house anytime I have to go down there. This is kinda scary, but maybe it was just for me. I used to have an imaginary best friend named Faster. We would go to his town all of the time, and we would have to rescue everyone from his evil twin brother, Taste Tester. Later on, Taste Tester scared me so much and threatened to eat me alive, so Faster left so that he would leave me alone. Not that bad, but when I was in middle school, I became friends with the fastest boy in my grade. We were best friends, but his twin brother kinda sketched me out. One day, I hear someone call his brother Taste Tester. Out of confusion, I ask what's up with the wacky nickname, and someone told me that he bit people after he beat them up. At this point, all I can think is that Fast Boy's brother is a wacko, and this is all just a crazy coincidence. Fast Boy's brother starts to act like a jerk to me by throwing punches and calling me names. One day, as I'm leaving PE, he slams me against a locker and almost knocks me out. I'm kinda dazed on the floor. Fast Boy comes running in right as his brother had his jaw wide open, centimeters away from my arm. Fast Boy slaps his brother, and I scurry away. Fast Boy later tells me that they're moving away forever, and we would probably never talk again. I constantly think of those years and how my imagination warped into reality. The truth is that I missed Fast Boy, but I can't for the life of me remember his name, and maybe that's just how it's supposed to be. My son was 3 to 4 years old when he met his invisible friends, the guys. There were 3 of them. We would often find my son talking quietly to them, and he wouldn't tell us what he was talking about. He started to act out, and it really seemed to be related to the guys. We mentioned it to someone at our church, and they organized a group of Christian ladies to come through our house and pray. We didn't tell them much, just that there was an imaginary friend. The ladies very quickly identified a few things that we didn't tell them about, and realized that there were 3 imaginary friends, which we never told them either. They prayed over our house and told the guys to leave and never come back. Our kids weren't in the room when this happened. After this, my son didn't have to speak to the guys anymore. But maybe a week later, he told us that the guys wanted to come back and play, and they would give him cookies if he let them. It was pretty freaky. To this day, I'm not sure what I believe about it. I think the guys were possibly evil and might have actually existed somehow. Not mine, but my mother's. It's about a creature she used to call the Night Mother. In the late 60s/early 70s, she moved with her family to her grandmother's house in Rhineland, Germany. The house was big and old, a classic ghost house with a big garden and farmland they had to work on. The grandmother was a mean creature, almost psychologically torturing her daughter-in-law, who was my grandmother. My grandparents had 7 children, 1 boy, the oldest, who got his own room, and 6 girls who had to share the other bedroom. The girls were between 4 and 12 years old. That's when it all started. They all claimed that at nights when they all lay in bed, 2 of them sharing one, a woman dressed in black would visit their bedroom. She would stand at the foot of each bed, sometimes tugging them a little bit closer with the blankets and watching them. She had skeleton fingers and never spoke to them. It wasn't every night, but quite regularly, and they were all scared to death every time it happened. No one moved or said a thing, just stared at her. A few of the younger ones would be already asleep sometimes. They gave her the name Abendmutter, translated Night Mother, and they say they didn't have the feeling that she was evil, more protecting, but of course they were scared of her, because who wouldn't be? One aunt remembers that in the first night, she whispered, "Can you see that too?" to her sister, who nodded. They can't remember if they ever tried speaking to her, though. When they told their parents, it was pushed off as nightmares, and really no one cared at the time. Everyone worked 12 hours a day. Even the children often helped them. Every one of my aunts remember this story, but they don't talk about it often, and they felt uncomfortable when I asked about it as a kid. They are all still 100% convinced that it happened. I tried a lot of explanations for this. Mass hallucinations, the grandmother dressing up and being a fucking psychopath, torturing her grandchildren, maybe coping with trauma, but we never really can be sure what they saw, or why. A bit of background. Up until I was 4 years old, I had trouble sleeping. My parents tried everything they could and visited countless doctors, but nothing helped. I slept for no more than 2 hours at a time, and longer nights were more of an expectation than a regularity. On a few occasions, I turned a bit creepy. One time I was asleep and woke up in the middle of the night screaming. I only have very, very vague memories of this. My mom ran into my bedroom and sat on my bed and asked what was wrong. Little 2-year-old me pointed to the corner of the ceiling and with a very deep voice said, "That one." My mom asked me if I was seeing a ghost, but I just kept repeating, "That one, that one." My mom decided to try to calm me down by saying that she let the ghost out through the window. She opened the window and pointed towards it, saying, "Come on, go here." And after that, I fell back asleep without a word. Similar things happened multiple times, but this is the only thing I have any recollection of. So yeah, I was a bit of an odd one growing up. For a bit of backstory, my family has always been a bit more sensitive to potentially supernatural things. The house we lived in was weird to me, and it gave off really strange vibes. I would always hear things when I was alone. When I was 14 years old, my younger sister was about 4. The layout of our house was so that you walked through the front door into a big entryway that led to the reception rooms and the staircase. The entryway was big enough for us to have a desk set up opposite the stairs. So one day, I'm sitting at the computer back in dial-up times, and I was on MSN talking to some friends. My younger sister and I are the only 2 people in the house. My sister is playing on the bottom step of the staircase. She couldn't go any higher because there was a gate stopping her, so she was perfectly safe. After being on the computer for a little while, I wasn't really paying huge attention to my sister. I realized that she's talking, but she's not talking to me. I listened for a couple minutes, and it sounded like she was talking to somebody else, like she was just saying one side of the conversation. I turn around to face her and I ask her who she's talking to. She very nonchalantly tells me she's talking to her friend at the top of the stairs. Now, I can't see anything, so I question her further. She tells me it's a little girl with long hair. I asked her exactly where this little girl was, and she told me she's hanging from the wall. It's safe to say I grabbed her and ran out of the house. I refused to return until the rest of the family was home. My sister and I are a year apart. During the height of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends TV show, I decided to have a few imaginary friends. My sister had one as well. I would always talk about how I left mine at school by accident. My sister would tell me at recess she would go talk to hers and gossip. I had two. One was a girl my age at the time, and the other was a small orange fluff ball. Hers was a white fox with red eyes. Its name was Snowy, or something along those lines. A year later, we never really talked about them anymore, and just kind of kept on living. I shared a room with my sister. There was like a few feet between our beds, enough to walk through, so we were pretty close, but still far apart. Our feet faced the door, and the closet was just a few feet from that. It had two sliding doors for it, but one was normally broken, and it never closed all the way. One night, my cousin stayed with us, and he slept with me in my bed. Common thing in our family. One thing to note, I am a very light sleeper, so I wake up for just simple things. We slept pretty late that night because we were all playing and having fun. It's never really dark in our room because the street kind of lights it up, so I can see pretty well at night. I will always remember this night. When we were all sleeping, my sister quickly sits up and says, "Snowy is here." My eyes already opened the second she moved in her bed, and I asked, "Who?" without thinking. She just points to the closet and says, "Snowy, he's there," and then lays back down and goes back to sleep. When I say this, I have no idea what compelled me to look. I'm a scaredy cat. I guess during the moment I just wasn't thinking. I sat up and felt my heart stop the second I locked eyes with these two red dots. After a second, without looking away, I was trying to shake my cousin awake. "He's here. He's real." He just quickly pulled the blanket over his head, mumbling something. I remember each breath shaking as I watch in the pitch-black closet where the red eyes reside. It slowly started to move behind the closet door. That's when I decided to lay back down without looking away. When I saw them disappear, I just completely laid down and went to sleep. We talked about it in the morning and laughed it off like it was nothing. We chalked it up to, "You just have a wild, strong imagination and brought it to life." I remember that night, but I was always too scared to bring it up again. That room always freaked me out, and I hated being alone in there. A few weird encounters in that room since then, but that was the worst. Okay, I'm a teenager, but I know this from family stories. Maybe they were all coincidences, but I think that there were too many. Me, my two brothers, and our cousins, we all had a fair share of imaginary friends. They weren't all really creepy, but they were like visions, little prophecies. My older brother had a friend called Jake, and they worked together at Apple. He was only 5 and a computer geek already because of my dad, who's the same way. 10 years later, my aunt wanted to introduce her new boyfriend to us. My now uncle is named Jake, and has worked in Microsoft for around 20 years. My younger brother, he was born in 2010. He was about 4, close to turning 5, when this story happened. He had a friend named Charlie. She was a girl, and her actual name was Charlotte, but he always called her Charlie. She told him that once she becomes a princess, they won't be able to play anymore, and in 2015, they stopped playing. And the British royal family have since then welcomed Princess Charlotte Elizabeth Diana the same year. I had a friend named Angie. At some point, I got mad at her and said I never wanted to do anything with her again. Then I started mentioning Angie again, and when my parents asked, jokingly, if the two of us made up, I said, "No, this is a different Angie," and proceeded to describe a different girl. A few years later, I met a girl from my school who I was friends with for years until she backstabbed me and we never spoke again. A couple of years after that, I met my best friend forever until this very day. Both of them are named Angie. My younger cousin, just a year back, had an imaginary friend named Peter. Peter supposedly had blue eyes and dark brown hair, and really liked Spider-Man, just like my little cousin. A little while later, my cousin started going to kindergarten, and one day I was there to pick him up, and he went, "Look, this is my best friend Pete." His best friend had blue eyes, dark brown hair, and a Spider-Man shirt. I nearly fainted.